West Asia, and North Africa. He takes special interest in the political elite of South Asia and the actual conduct of foreign policy in the South Asian region. His Twitter handle, he is right.
पहिला सांगा ताई म्हणते
Sorry for some technical difficulties here. तो कलोल भट्टाचार्य सर के बारे में जो मैंने आपको बताया कि उनका काफी अच्छा रिसर्च है इस फील्ड के ऊपर, जो टॉपिक वो आज हमारे साथ एड्रेस करने वाले हैं। उनका जो टॉपिक है अंडरस्टैंडिंग द तालिबान मिलिट्री विक्ट्री, अफगानिस्तान के ऊपर सर ने बहुत अच्छा रिसर्च किया है। उनकी एक हाल ही में एक किताब मैंने पढ़ी थी, उसका नाम था द ग्रेट गेम इन अफगानिस्तान, राजीव गांधी एंड जनरल जिया एंड द अनएंडिंग वॉर। तो सर आपने बहुत अच्छी तरह से इस किताब को स्ट्रक्चराइज किया है, तो मुझे हमें बहुत पसंद आई। कल मैंने हमारे पार्टिसिपेंट को भी आपके इस किताब के बुक्स के बारे में बताया था। तो आई वेलकम टू अवर नॉर्थ महाराष्ट्र यूनिवर्सिटी, केबीसी नॉर्थ महाराष्ट्र यूनिवर्सिटी, एंड लेट मी इंट्रोड्यूस सेकंड सेशन चेयर Professor Dr. Padgudar sir. Now he is a principal Women Senior College Shahada. He is also a well-known personality in defense and strategic studies at North Maharashtra University. डॉक्टर बड़गुदर सर हमारे जो आज के चेयरपर्सन है, उन्होंने 15 साल तक नॉर्थ महाराष्ट्र यूनिवर्सिटी में एडल्ट एंड कंटिन्यूइंग एजुकेशन के वो डायरेक्टर रह चुके हैं। उसके बाद में अपना एनएसएस के वो कोऑर्डिनेटर रह चुके हैं। उसके बाद में मुंबई यूनिवर्सिटी का एसएनडीटी जो विमेंस कॉलेज है, वहाँ पे वो तकरीबन 2.5 साल तक उन्होंने रजिस्ट्रार इस पोस्ट के ऊपर काम किया है। उसके बाद में वीएन नाइक कॉलेज शाहदा से उन्होंने वो प्रिंसिपल भी थे 3 साल तक। अभी शाहदा में विमेंस कॉलेज में प्रिंसिपल है। तो सर का हमें हमेशा सपोर्ट रहता है सर, इस हम जो इवेंट्स लेते हैं तो सर हमें हमेशा उसके बारे में गाइडलाइन देते हैं। तो आज कलोल भट्टाचार्य सर के सेशन में वो ये सेशन चेयर करने वाले हैं। तो मैं सभी का आपका इस सेशन में स्वागत करता हूँ और बड़गुजर सर से गुजारिश करता हूँ कि वो 2 शब्द इस सेमिनार के बारे में एड्रेस करें। प्रोफेसर बड़गुजर सर।
Respected guest of today, Dr. Bhattacharya ji, head of the Department of Defense and Strategic Studies, KBC North Maharashtra University, Jalgaon, that is Dr. Tushar sir, and all my colleagues in Defense and Strategic Studies, and the audience participants. I rather open the topic for the presentation of Dr. Bhattacharya ji. To my mind, Taliban's activity was an event of 3 months. In 1990, communist government failed and America came into the picture. After 20 years of long stay in Afghanistan, to my mind, I feel America could not present themselves on the front of development of Afghanistan. And that is the reason that Taliban has taken the advantage of the situation. They had a talk with the rural people of the Afghanistan and initiated a action of military action. After the withdrawal of America from Afghanistan. That was in August 2021. It's a Afghans, its victory, Taliban's victory can be a hybrid success of the Taliban. It's a politico-military event that is conducted by the Taliban. I hope the details of this event will be elaborated by today's honorable guest, Dr. Bhattacharya ji. I request on behalf of KBC North Maharashtra University and my personal level to Dr. Bhattacharya ji to initiate the discussion and cooperate. Thank you very much.
थैंक यू सर, थैंक यू प्रोफेसर बड़गुजर सर। मैं अभी ज्यादा समय ना लेते हुए आज के हमारे जो रिसोर्स पर्सन एक्सपर्ट है भट्टाचार्य सर जी से रिक्वेस्ट करता हूँ कि वो उनके थॉट्स आज के सेशन में रखें। डॉक्टर भट्टाचार्य सर।
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me to this national seminar in Afghanistan. Thank you, Dr. Badguzar. Thank you so much for your historical perspective that you have provided to the topic already. Thank you, Tusharji, for inviting me and for following up with me and for facilitating this interaction today. I'm indeed grateful to North Maharashtra University for giving me this opportunity to discuss Afghanistan as we are seeing today. And of course, the topic being understanding the Taliban victory. As Dr. Badguzar has already given the historical orientation, we understand that the story really begins in the past. Though Taliban has got a massive military victory, it has become one of those rare militant or terrorist movements which has overthrown the government of the country. But the fact is, was it an event of the last few months? Or was it an event that unfolded over a long period of time? I would say the event actually begins exactly 10 years ago, in 2011. All of you would remember that in the month of May 2011, Osama bin Laden was killed in Abbottabad, Pakistan. With that killing of Osama bin Laden, there came a realization among the American establishment that the main aim of their actions and their operation in Afghanistan was revenge for the 9/11 attacks. That revenge was sort of had with the assassination or murder of Osama bin Laden in Abbottabad. The US establishment began to think at that time that what they had to achieve, that the revenge for 9/11 attacks had been achieved. Now, what remained for them in Afghanistan? What was the goal for staying on in Afghanistan after achieving the revenge for 9/11 attacks in New York of 2001? This thinking began the process of engaging with the Taliban. To begin with, there was this very deep desire to understand if Taliban had also a negotiating team or a negotiating arm. Till that point, Taliban were fighting fiercely. If you remember, if you go back even further to 2007, 2008, 2009, and 2010, those years were extremely violent for Afghanistan and for Pakistan. There were blasts and terror attacks all the while. In fact, the assassination of Benazir Bhutto in December 2007 was one of those high points of Taliban, Afghanistan, Pakistan kind of violence that we saw during that time. So the Americans wanted to understand if there was indeed a desire for negotiation, even among the Taliban, which was a fighting team at that time. At that moment, there came an international organization that is called the Pugwash movement, which is globally known to be an anti-nuclear global peace movement, the Pugwash team came into picture. Pugwash, many of us may remember, actually was active in the Kashmir scene for some years before that. But from 2009 or 10 and 11 onwards, especially after the death of Osama bin Laden, Pugwash became involved in Afghanistan. And the Pugwash team appointed a local nodal agency, or a group of researchers and activists whose job it was to find out within Taliban who would be interested in having a dialogue. Initially, the dialogue began in various small provinces of Afghanistan, and that dialogue slowly evolved into some sort of a confidence building measure. The Taliban were obviously very, very secretive. They were cautious, and they wanted they wanted, first of all, guarantees for safety. If at all they had to participate in this sort of secret track to dialogue with an international peace organization. The Pugwash team in Afghanistan worked through proxies to reach out to Taliban. So what Pugwash did was that they reached out to the tribal elders in various provinces and what they called then the ex-Taliban leaders and commanders. So those people then would interact with Pugwash, and then they would take the messages or their demands to the Taliban. Their role would be, their job would be to bring back the demands from Taliban back to Pugwash, and then Pugwash would then sort of share it among various stakeholders, various countries like United States, Pakistan, India also, Iran, and other countries, Russia. Every country would be then informed about what the Taliban's positions and Taliban's demands were. So a dialogue began from 2011 on, and this remained a highly secret and totally deep background kind of a dialogue. We all know what happened with the president of the United States, Donald Trump. Everybody was surprised when Donald Trump announced that he was going to appoint a special representative, Zalmay Khalilzad, for negotiating with the Taliban. But that announcement, which I think came in 2018, was not sudden. There were almost 7 to 8 years of silent work by various track 2 diplomats, State Department officials, ex-State Department officials, including the famous, rather controversial figure called Robin Raphael, who was at one point quite a familiar face in South Asia. Robin Raphael was also involved in this negotiation. And from 2011 to 2016, they held a number of dialogue with various teams of the Taliban. This dialogue then went on to produce a turnaround in 2016, January and February. So it was finally in 2016, January and in February, that the Taliban began to send high-level teams for dialogue, and various venues were chosen for that kind of dialogue, because the people who were being sent were commanders. They were active fighters who were fighting the United States, but they were also the leading figures of the Taliban forces. Remember also that because of perhaps these initiatives, Obama administration, way back in 2014, had even released some of the leading Taliban commanders from Guantanamo Bay. And I think they were called the Gitmo 5, the famous 5 commanders that Obama administration had released in 2014, who went on to then join the negotiating team. So even during the Obama administration, the Taliban were actually working for a settlement, for a dialogue with the American forces. One thing that they were not doing is that they were not assuring of ceasefire on the ground. So it was a very difficult and controversial dialogue to hold, because the Taliban were continuing their ground attacks on the US forces, and the US was suffering casualties on the ground, and it was also fighting back the Taliban advances. But on the negotiating table, on the front of negotiation, they were both engaged very, very strongly by January and February 2016. So from 2016 onwards, Taliban appeared very confident of the fact that they were finally moving towards something concrete. So when you say understanding the Taliban military victory, it is also understanding Taliban's diplomatic victory. And the Taliban have been quite, I must say, quite well calculated in their moves in diplomacy as well. A lot of people have helped this negotiation because everybody wanted that conflict to end. Just now, as everybody wants the current conflict in Afghanistan also to end, everybody wants that Taliban must not cross boundaries and should not be taking revenge on the former military officials who still remain in Afghanistan. So that is a different matter. But as of now, I would say that it was not just a military victory. It was also a diplomatic victory that the Taliban were working towards. And they were being helped by a lot of people, even from among the United States establishment, who are helping them reach some sort of an amicable solution. So as I began that this is almost a decade-old military diplomatic maneuver that the Taliban had been working along with, of course, the United States, through various stakeholders like the international Pugwash movement. And that is what I feel we must understand, that Taliban is not a 3-month-old military campaign or its current diplomatic outreach that it is taking out. I mean, today the Taliban will be meeting, perhaps they'll be sending a representative to Tehran, where all the countries of the region, the Central Asian countries, Iran, Russia, and Pakistan, as well as China, will be meeting to discuss Afghanistan. So this diplomatic reach, of course, comes at a very critical time, but it appears increasingly that Taliban's military victory is here to stay for some time, and Taliban is quite well entrenched. Now, having said that, I would move towards the fact that the weaknesses of this military victory and why this military victory is a very unsound kind of military victory if it fails to achieve the intra-Afghan solidarity. And here I would also go back to my own work in The Great Game in Afghanistan, Rajiv Gandhi, General Zia, and the Unending War, that I published in 2017 and which has been discussed quite often recently because of the developments in Afghanistan. I would say that this is a moment in history when we should compare the Taliban-US diplomatic dialogue of the last 5 or 6 years with the Geneva Accords of 1988. The Geneva Accord of 1988 achieved what we all knew as the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, brought to a conclusion. The Geneva Accord was the concluding act of the Soviet occupation in Afghanistan. And it was achieved after a lot of background diplomacy involving India, King Zahir Shah, the Mujahideen leaders, Pakistan, and the United States, as well as the Soviet Union. And General Zia and Rajiv Gandhi at that time had worked jointly to bring an end to the Soviet occupation and bring a broad-based or an inclusive government in Afghanistan, which even now we all are expecting and trying for. What happened in Geneva Accords was that it was guaranteed by the major stakeholders, but it failed at one point, which is that it did not have the guarantors for an intra-Afghan solidarity. And that is why finally the intra-Afghan solidarity was not achieved, and the civil war began soon thereafter in the 1990s. Similarly, we see that in the US-Taliban dialogue and US-Taliban negotiation also, United States left out the intra-Afghan piece for the Taliban to achieve. That, according to me, is the main weakness of Taliban's military victory. because Taliban has been a fighting team. It has been a force of resistance, and it has used brutal terroristic tactics to achieve its goals. But it was not supposed to build social consensus. It was not expected or groomed in a way to become a tool for peace and negotiation with fellow Afghans, because it also has an ethno-national characteristic. It is a Pashtun nationalist movement as well. So the main mistake of US Taliban negotiation was that it left out the intra-Afghan peace or dialogue for state formation to the Taliban themselves. The question is, was there a reason for the US to believe that the Taliban were going to be honest in their dealings with fellow Afghans? I doubt that. The United States ideally should have brought all other stakeholders also to the table for a second phase of dialogue or negotiation, in which the Tajiks, the Uzbeks, the Kyrgyz, the religious minorities like Hindus and Sikhs and Christians, whatever numbers they may be, women and many others had to be brought to the table, probably in Doha, in Qatar, where they could have interacted with the Taliban as well as the United States, and could have formed some kind of an inclusive government, or rather show the intention of forming an inclusive government. That was not done. Instead, what the Americans did was that under Zalmay Khalilzad and Mullah Baradars diplomatic team, they went ahead and sealed a deal with the Taliban, with each other, and left that the goal of social solidarity to the Taliban to achieve. That is why today, as soon as the US withdrawal, which was a very messy and chaotic and dangerous kind of withdrawal, we see that Afghanistan has fallen apart. A state runs on social contract, a social contract that is achieved by the coming together of all sections of society. If one section says the others are irrelevant, and if it declares a war on the rest, then that state cannot be functioning. It becomes a state of nature. And that is what has happened in Afghanistan, that it has relapsed into a state of nature, an anarchical situation, where the so-called government of Taliban, the Islamic Emirate, has neither revenue nor the wherewithal for running a state apparatus, nor can it run the basic services and facilities that are needed for the most vulnerable section of the society. So you have an outrageous situation on the ground, which is again a result of Taliban's military victory. And I will come back to the topic of the day again to highlight that this military victory could have been, or so-called military victory, could have been used more sagaciously or wisely if it was crafted from the beginning to be shared by all sections of Afghan society after the Americans went home. It was not designed like that. And that is a main weakness of the diplomatic negotiation that Zalmay Khalilzad conducted with the Taliban. I think now that you have a situation where the Taliban are in power, but are actually powerless to run the country in a unified and cohesive manner, you have the situation of what goes on. We have the opportunity to look at what really is going on inside the Taliban. We have to really ask ourselves: is Taliban a single unit, or is Taliban a single, homogeneous unit in which can actually operate with all its political will intact? And increasingly, we have found in recent days that the Taliban has actually fallen apart because of its military victory. So not only that the military victory was not well designed or crafted for social cohesion post-military victory, this victory is also being handled very negatively by certain sections of the Taliban. As of now, we have a situation in Afghanistan where one section of the Taliban believes that they are patriots. They are true to their motherland, and they don't want Taliban to become an instrument for colonization. That section is very strong, and it is also being supported by some of the veteran senior commanders who had fought against the Americans from the very, very beginning. That is from 1990s to until very recently, and they were also part of the negotiation in Doha. So all those commanders, including Mullah Baradar, constitute what is known as the Kandahari faction. They are arguing that the world should recognize the fact that Taliban is here, and they should be interacting more closely with the Kandahari Taliban. On the other hand, you have the Haqqani network, which had very close ties with the Kandahari section throughout, because the patriarch Jalaluddin Haqqani had been a force to reckon with from the early 1980s. And he was one of the founders of the anti-Soviet movement, and which then went on to become the anti-US movement. His sons are very much visible. You can see Anas Haqqani traveling across the world. He had recently visited Moscow. His other son, Sirajuddin Haqqani, was appointed initially as the interior minister of Taliban. But soon thereafter, conflict broke out inside the Taliban, and Sirajuddin Haqqani had some sort of checks appointed against him within the Interior Ministry. Basically, Mullah Baradar appointed certain people to control Sirajuddin Haqqani's power. In this situation, where the Haqqanis are not in good terms with the Kandahari faction of the Taliban, we are increasingly finding that Taliban is at war with itself. Apart from the recent news report of a fight that took place between Sirajuddin, I think Anas and others, and other Haqqanis, as well as Mullah Baradar, we have seen other reports that indicate that Haqqani networks, one section, which is the Hanafi section, is also quite close to the Islamic State. And the Taliban has made it clear, especially the Kandahari section of the Taliban has made it clear, that they will not tolerate the Islamic State. They will also not tolerate some of the erstwhile partners like the Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra and other such terrorist outfits that are still active in Afghanistan, because those terrorists and those fighters that were in prison were granted general amnesty with the departure of the Ashraf Ghani government. So on the one hand, you have Taliban, which is unable to handle military victory because there is no social cohesion. There is random public execution happening of the fighters and also of the former military officials. In some cases, even activists and civil society peace activists have also been targeted, threatened, their family members assassinated and murdered. And on the other hand, you have the internal situation of Afghanistan, where the Taliban, the main ruler of the country as of now, is actually at war with itself. So the military victory of the Taliban is not a very pleasant outcome that Taliban expected to achieve. It has brought greater risks for the Taliban. Therefore, the main issue in front of us today is that the military victory is not only appearing to be transient, it is in fact appearing to be fast fading. And the Taliban are at great risk of dissolving itself into a greater civil anarchy. This can be stopped only if the world suddenly wakes up and recognizes the Taliban as a legitimate government of Afghanistan, and terms the Islamic State of Afghanistan as the legitimate political entity, and also grants it various other multilateral benefits and status, like the membership of the United Nations General Assembly and all of the such facilities. But here is the question. On the one hand, when the Taliban are actually killing former officials of the government of Afghanistan, just yesterday they killed, I think, one commando who used to work in the army, in the Afghan National Defense Force of Ashraf Ghani's government. And how can an international community come to terms with a force which is carrying out public executions? Just like the Pol Pot used to carry out public executions in Cambodia. I mean, the Pol Pot regime used to carry out public executions in Cambodia in the 1970s. We all remember those brutal images of Khmer Rouge carrying out those public executions in Southeast Asia in those days. So how can the world recognize a government, the Taliban as a government, and the Taliban-led Afghan state as a legitimate state, when it is carrying out such brutal public executions and torturing a wide section of the Afghan people? So therefore, there is a need to engage the Taliban, to convince it, and to test if it is willing to put limits and checks to its power. It has conquered Afghanistan. For the first time in 45 years, all the Afghan provinces have been brought under control of a single force, a single military force in the country. But at the same time, it has also opened all the fault lines of Afghan society. Already there are talks that the country would be better off if it was divided among the Pashtuns and the non-Pashtuns. There have also been talks about the Turkic northern areas to be separated from the country. But that is not possible because the Taliban are now a military force inside the country. They have established total military dominance and monopoly inside the country. So the only outcome is to test the outfit and its real intentions. But given the level of violence which is currently ongoing and which we mostly cannot hear about because there are no independent, not enough independent reporters and media persons in the villages and in other towns and smaller towns of Afghanistan. But whatever we are gathering from the social media and from our friends and other civil society activists in the country is that high level of violence has been unleashed by Taliban as a result of this military victory against its own people on ethnic grounds, on political grounds, on the grounds of affiliation. They are being targeted. So there is an urgent need to understand how to help the people of Afghanistan who are suffering, number one, from total economic devastation because of this military victory and a meltdown of the state. People are not attending their offices, children are not going to schools. Women have been asked not to come to offices because their presence is not required anymore. In that kind of a situation, in that kind of an ideological framework, running a modern state is almost impossible. Yet we are faced with nothing else but the Taliban because it is the victor in the military and diplomatic negotiation with the United States. The only hope again lies with the United States to take a leadership position and come back to the world with a fresh plan through which the world can be asked to, world can ask the Taliban to correct its ongoing mistakes, put limits to its military violence against its internal fellow Afghans, and somehow build a social cohesion so that a modern state could at least begin to function in Afghanistan. Because every other country in the neighborhood are going to be affected if this meltdown in Afghanistan continues. Already there are talks that thousands and thousands of Afghan refugees are pushing their way forward to European frontiers. So if that happens, then there is going to be that is already happening, a refugee inflow into the Europe, into the European heartland. So the Afghan heart of Asia, the bleeding heart of Asia, if it continues to bleed in this way, then neither Europe nor Asia will remain peaceful or secure in the long run. I would say that these are some of the thoughts that I am sharing with you right now. And I look forward to hearing your opinion and interact with you in the coming few minutes and perhaps half an hour. Thank you.
सर, आपने बहुत सारे इश्यूज को अफगानिस्तान के जो इंटरनल डायनामिक्स है उनको टच किया। बहुत सारी चीजें जो तालिबान के जो फैक्शंस है, हक्कानी नेटवर्क हुआ, मुल्ला बरादर का एक ग्रुप हुआ, उसके बारे में आपने बहुत सारा डिटेल हमें बताया सर। तो आई एम गोइंग टू request to Professor Badgujar sir to kindly conclude the session remark. Professor Badgujar sir.
Respected Chief Guest, Dr. Bhattacharya ji, my dear friends from Defense and Strategic Studies and all faculties, I would rather congratulate Dr. Bhattacharya ji. Sir, I have got one friend in Delhi, and he's from Kerala. He is Mr. Dr. Prasanna Kumar. He is also working with international affairs in Delhi. He is also by Defense and Strategic Studies from Kerala, and he is a Manorama Group. I would like to congratulate Dr. Bhattacharya ji, as he has taken a very correct historical review of Taliban's movement. It's a revenge of 2001 attack of 9/11. He also said it is a political, diplomatic, and a military action succeeded by the tribals, Talibans. Internal dynamics he has very well explained. And I would like to, with this, I would like to congratulate Dr. Bhattacharya ji and would like to conclude with this remark. Thank you very much.
थैंक यू सर। सर, इसके बाद हम कुछ पार्टिसिपेंट हैं सर जो आपसे क्वेश्चन पूछना चाहते हैं। तो अभी ये आगे का जो 10 मिनट का जो वक्त है उसमें हम क्वेश्चन आंसर सेशन के लिए सारे पार्टिसिपेंट को ओपन करते हैं। अमित कुमार सर, आप अपना क्वेश्चन पूछ सकते हैं।
सर, हेलो
जी, yes please.
I want to ask a question. Was absconding of Ashraf Ghani pre-planned? Is or America is behind it, sir?
Well, what happens is that when a government has fallen apart and there is no other option, this sort of evacuation or this sort of escape is often staged. It is not possible without international support. It is also not possible to evacuate the president of a country without the support of the occupying power, that is the United States. So you see, I mean, even it's kind of an unwritten fact of this particular episode कि उनको तो जाना ही था। अब जब अगर वो रहते वहां पर तो वहां पर मारामारी और ज्यादा हो जाती और तालिबान को जो डिप्लोमेटिक नेगोशिएशन हुआ 10 साल में, उसका असल गोल तो वही था ना कि तालिबान को पावर मिलेगा, तभी तो ये नेगोशिएशन चल रही थी इतने सालों से। तो अशरफ गनी का जाना पहले से ही तय था। अशरफ गनी नेगोशिएशन में इन्वॉल्व भी नहीं थे। उनका जो रोल था वो बहुत ही लिमिटेड था। उनको कई बार कंसल्ट भी नहीं करते थे अमेरिकन। तो बस एक उनका ये रोल था कि जब तक नेगोशिएशन चले तब तक उनका जो जॉब है, उनका जो काम है, उनको वो करते रहना चाहिए। So what happened at the end is that his job was complete and he had to leave the stage, and that was done with the help of regional countries as well as the the main power, that is the United States. Because remember that the Americans were controlling the airspace over Afghanistan till the last moment. So it goes without saying, yes, I mean, उसके बगैर तो हो ही नहीं सकता ना कि Americans के तो जो support और उनके approval के बगैर तो वो जाते ही नहीं वहां से.
And sir, what stand should India take towards Taliban government, sir, newly formed Taliban government?
Well, the government of India has spelt out its position quite clearly. It has made it very clear that it does not want the people of Afghanistan to suffer. अफगानिस्तान के लोग जो हैं, जो आम जनता है वहां के, जो इस वक्त बहुत मुसीबत में है, उनके अस्पतालों में मेडिसिन्स नहीं है, पेन किलर्स तक नहीं है, पैरासिटामोल टैबलेट्स भी नहीं है काबुल के अस्पताल में. जो यंग मदर्स है या फिर जो प्रेगनेंसी के स्टेज में है, उनको भी बहुत सारी तकलीफ हो रही है क्योंकि पेन किलर्स नहीं है. अगर आप समझ सकते हैं कि पेन किलर्स नहीं है तो एनेस्थेटिक्स भी नहीं है वहां पर. तो जो ऑपरेशंस है और क्रिटिकली इल पेशेंट्स जो हैं, उनको भी कोई दवा नहीं मिल रही है. सो अफगानिस्तान पीपल आर सफरिंग एंड द गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया हैज मेड इट वेरी क्लियर that they don't want, that is, India doesn't want the people of Afghanistan to suffer, because the current rulers of Afghanistan are not very, to our liking. I mean, the Taliban are ruling Afghanistan, but Taliban is not really up to the standard that the world expects the government to be. So India's position is quite clear that Taliban must ensure unimpeded humanitarian access, so that essential goods like medicines, food, and food for children, baby food, and other such items could be provided to the country through international relief organizations. They have also made it quite clear that this collaboration and this cooperation will not be extended through the offices of the Taliban. This will be provided through the international relief organizations, international NGOs, and other such outfits that are credible and have experience in providing support and help to conflict-ridden people. Yeah, sure.
विस्पुत सर, प्रोफेसर विस्पुत सर, आपका क्वेश्चन है? हाँ सर, उनका क्वेश्चन है सर से, व्हाट विल बी द फ्यूचर? हाँ, अफगानिस्तान का आगे का भविष्य क्या रहेगा सर? तालिबान टेक ओवर इन अफगानिस्तान के बाद में अफगानिस्तान का आने वाला भविष्य आप कैसे देखते हो सर? उसमें क्या बदलाव आ सकते?
देखिए,
उनका क्वेश्चन है।
तालिबान में अफगानिस्तान में इस वक्त कम से कम 10,000 आतंकवादी हैं जो कि इंटरनेशनल फाइटर्स हैं, और ये एक कम से कम फिगर बताया जा रहा है. रियल फिगर और रियल नंबर्स इससे कई गुना ज्यादा हो सकता है. ये जितने फाइटर्स अफगानिस्तान में इस वक्त हैं, वो सब के सब या तो फिर वही के लोकल हैं या फिर बाहर से हैं, सेंट्रल एशिया से हैं, पाकिस्तान से हैं, चाइना से हैं, टर्की और सीरिया, कई अरब देशों से हैं. इन सब फाइटर्स और टेररिस्ट्स को अशरफ गनी का जो गवर्नमेंट था, उन्होंने जेल में बंद करके रखा हुआ था. अब तालिबान के आइडियोलॉजिकल रीजंस के चलते उन्होंने इन सब आतंकवादियों को एमनेस्टी दे दिया. उनको रातों रात they were released. Now they are living like free citizens in Afghanistan and are threatening the Taliban itself. So Taliban is obviously not a very efficient and a very wise outfit. The future of Afghanistan will be decided by the handling of these terrorists by the Taliban. If Taliban handles these terrorists ruthlessly, in the way that they are known to deal with their enemies, only then Afghanistan will be peaceful. Otherwise, Afghanistan is expected to become a great exporter of terrorism across the world. And the region of South Asia will be the first to be hit by that. We are already seeing the fallout of it in the surge in violence in Kashmir. Because at the end of the day, what is happening in Afghanistan is basically a moral booster for all sorts of extremist forces that are associated with Taliban and its ideology. We have already seen the spike in violence which is taking place in Syria, because the extremist forces like Al-Nusra and others have already welcomed the Taliban victory, and they feel that they too stand a chance in fighting the government of Syria that is led by President Assad. So the future of Afghanistan basically is a very violent future. That is all it appears like at the moment, and it is going to be tragic, unfortunately, for the people of that country, the common people, who are very resourceful, very friendly, but are in a very unfortunate situation right now.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Sachin? Hello, Sachin.
Hello.
हाँ Sachin, बोलो.
Hello, sir. Are you getting my voice?
Yeah.
Yes.
Sir, first of all, thank you much for perspective on present, debacle is going on in Afghanistan. So my question is based on the, I have multiple questions with you. The kind of this topic is, vast like this is, but there is ample of questions regarding it. But I just want to focus on 2 or 3 questions. The first question is that the recent Afghanistan crisis, I personally believe that narrative has been done by India to the Pakistan right now. And number one is that we are just taking Pakistan in a lightly mode. But as per the recent trends that is said by the Putin, that Pakistan is an important player region right now. Number one. So take on towards Pakistan and the international power. Number 2 is this: I'm counting Iran and Pakistan, the 2 major president in Iran right now, and he has a big challenge right now in front of him. And you talk about that the people of Afghanistan are lacking in the basic amenities regarding medical education system, and the huge migration is reach towards the Eastern Europe, Central Europe right now. And after Europe, the Germany is the number 1 right now. But due to that, most of the people are following the Iran right now, and Iran is sheltering a lot of people. And one more thing is that is Iran and Afghanistan has a cultural relations also, like their the language of Farsi. They have the common things over there. So don't you see any kind of debacle between the Shias and Sunnis in Afghanistan and Iran? And how do you see that the recent trends that happen in China? It's like Khorasan right now, said the China is on the new list right now. And the recent trends, that is a Moscow attack in Kunduz region in Afghanistan, where the I just forgot the name of that person. He was from the Uyghur Xinjiang region, and the Baloch people, they attack in Kandahar, Moscow. And right now, Islamic State Khorasan is recruiting these people from Baloch and from the Uyghur Muslims. So how do you see this, the region of surrounding areas? Putting questions in front of leader powers, how they are taking it. And a small thing over there, now there is a debate is going on right now that US can back the use of airspace of Pakistan to counter the drone activities and the air power to fight in the central region of Afghanistan. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, so I think you have raised the question from multiple points of views. First of all, you have asked about the role of Pakistan in this entire scenario that's unfolding. We have to understand that Pakistan is the crucial part of this puzzle. Without Pakistan, nothing could have been achieved. The Taliban, including Mullah Baradar, were in Pakistan's custody, and Mullah Baradar's wife, I think, still continues to live in Karachi. So, the Pakistanis had all the cards and they controlled the dialogue. And there were, in the last 10 years, there were several people who were eliminated and killed, those people who wanted to have independent dialogue with the Americans were eliminated by allegedly by Pakistani operators and ISI, because Pakistan wanted to monopolize the dialogue that the Taliban were having with the United States. So yes, I mean, this is an advantage for Pakistan, and Pakistan has always used, or rather viewed, Afghanistan as its strategic, backyard, or as they call it, the strategic depth. But having said that, I would also tell you that there is a division of opinion inside Pakistan about the way the situation is unfolding in Afghanistan. On the one hand, you have the current rulers, that is General Bajwa and the ISI, which just acquired a new chief yesterday. Still yesterday it was Faiz Hamid. So it was an achievement for them to have their so-called boys, Haqqani Network and others, to come to power in Kabul. But the situation is so critical in Afghanistan that even they are helpless in ensuring how to go ahead with this meltdown taking place in Afghanistan. And then internally also in Pakistan, there is a section led by former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, who is based in London, but who continues to maintain that Pakistan must be careful while dealing with the Taliban, because the Taliban are Pashtun nationalists. And the Taliban have not given any guarantee to Islamabad about recognizing the Durand line. Pakistan's key demand has always been that Afghanistan and any government in Afghanistan or anybody coming to power in Afghanistan must recognize the Durand line, because that is the source of all headache for Pakistan on the western front of the country. So Nawaz Sharif has been reminding the government of Imran Khan that they should not get deeper into the conflict of Afghanistan, because then the Pakistani state's internal divisions could be opened up. And if that happens, then the Pashtun nationalist faction, and you all know that in the last few years, there has been a Pashtun movement inside Pakistan, led by Manzoor Pashtun and others. There are frequent disappearances of Pathans and Pashtuns that take place inside Pakistan. And people just vanish. Those Pashtun people just vanish and they are never found. And very rarely, in some cases, they're released by the officials, the military establishment of Pakistan. So this is a two-pronged issue for Pakistan. On the one hand, they have every reason to feel satisfied and happy that they have achieved some sort of a military victory in Afghanistan that they so badly wanted. But on the other hand, they are unable to stop the blowback from reaching their internal arena. On the lastly is also the flow of the Afghan refugees through the checkpoints on the Western Front. We all have been seeing the visuals from Chaman and other Turkham and other such crossings. Literally hundreds and thousands of people are flowing into Pakistan daily. Pakistan has no understanding who are these people, and perhaps in some cases they do. Are there people of terrorist linkages among these people who are entering Pakistan? Are these people going to spread to other countries, maybe to the Arab world, to the Gulf? Are they headed for the LOC with India? We don't know. So Pakistan is ultimately going to be held accountable and responsible for whatever happens in our region. And that is why Pakistan's risk is manifold and it's growing. That's number one. You have raised the role of Iran. Iran was one of the first countries, not really the first, because the United States was the first. Iran was one of those to realize that the Taliban were coming to power. And they made peace with this understanding. And then they went ahead and established channel with the Taliban. Foreign Minister Javad Zarif kept visiting India and also told in number of occasions that Iran could help India connect with the Taliban, and also that Iran could help other countries to connect with the Taliban. Frankly, Iran really gambled because, number one, they wanted a military defeat for their arch enemy, that is the United States. They wanted the Americans to have a bloody nose in Afghanistan, just the way they delivered that to the Americans in Iraq. That was the number one goal for the Iranians. And Iranians were satisfied that the Taliban were delivering that defeat to the United States. Having delivered that defeat, Iran made some sort of a compromise with its fate, that the Taliban were not essentially very friendly, essentially unfriendly to Iran because of their theological and religious differences. On the one hand, Taliban are Sunnis. On the other hand, Iranians are Shias. Basic differences. But the Taliban also have another problem with Iran, which is that they are not very pro-Persianized Afghanistan. They are very proud of their mother tongue. That is Pashtun, and local language, that is Dari. And if they at all have to speak another language, they would speak Urdu, or even in some cases, Taliban leaders speak Hindustani or Hindi. But they are not quite Persianized. And that is a major difference, where the northern ethnic groups of Afghanistan, like the Tajiks, the Uzbeks and others, that they find with the Taliban. Because the Uzbeks, Hazaras, and also the Tajiks are easily defined as either Turkic as well as Persianized. They are more comfortable speaking in Persian or Farsi language, as we call. The cultural festival of Nowruz, or the New Year of Persia, is celebrated by all the Central Asian countries, and also by these groups like the Tajiks inside Afghanistan. Previously, even the Taliban used to celebrate Nowruz. They do wish people on Nowruz just the way people wish each other on Holi or Diwali or something like that. But the basic difference is religious, theological, as well as cultural, that is Persian and non-Persian. Taliban are essentially non-Persian. They have the history of having conquered parts of Persia. So Iran also has that historical baggage with Taliban. And that is why Iran's partnership with Afghanistan at the moment appears quite an effort on the part of the rulers in Tehran. If you see that one of the unspoken, or rather unmentioned, understanding of Iran-Taliban negotiation was that the Shias who live in Afghanistan will be protected. We all saw what has been happening in the Shia mosques in Afghanistan. There have been brutal violence, there have been blasts, suicide blasts, and then the Hazara community, which is a Shia, 100% Shia community, that community has been very badly treated in the last 3 months or so. So the assurances that the Taliban had given to Iran on taking care of the Shias, the minorities and others, has not been kept up so far. So Iran has nothing really to show that to prove that its gamble on the Taliban was correct. As of now, they have decided, and they have continued to supply energy, that is fuel, to the Afghan people, as a result of which Afghanistan continues to function smoothly There is no fuel scarcity in Afghanistan at the moment. If Iran were to stop supply of fuel in Afghanistan, then there would have been absolute chaos and anarchy for the Taliban, because the only thing that's working in Afghanistan right now is the fuel supply that is provided by the Iranians and the electricity, which was greatly helped by the electricity stations that and generating points that India built over the last 2 decades. So the Indian contribution also has to be remembered, which is partly responsible for helping the people of Afghanistan to deal with this chaotic, completely broken down situation. Third, you asked about the Chinese position and what they are going to get from the current rulers of Afghanistan. I would say that the Chinese are opportunist, and they felt that this is a good time to find a vacuum, and this is a good time to fill a vacuum, and they are trying to fill that vacuum because the Americans have withdrawn. So they want to take advantage of that vacuum, but they are also quite careful about getting infected by the radicalization, which is widespread inside Afghanistan and which is currently spreading across the checkpoints of Afghanistan and its neighboring states. So the Chinese are one of those players who are eyeing the natural resources of Afghanistan, and they are also quite watchful of the fallout that the Taliban may have on the supply lines of CPEC, which is running through Pakistan. So the Chinese want to ensure that they remain what is the win-win position. They remain in that win-win position as far as Afghanistan is concerned, and that they are not hurt by anything. They are also the Pakistan has been talking about the fact that the Taliban should crack down on the Baloch Liberation Army, or BLA, which operates from the bordering areas of Afghanistan and Pakistan. The Chinese are also quite keen because the Chinese were attacked by the BLA in the past, and BLA has been attacking them also in the last few days continuously. So the Chinese essentially want to ensure that nothing bad happens to them because of the Afghan situation. But they are, as of now, quite in a position which I can say that the net gainer. They have gained a lot from the current situation, and they don't seem to be adversely affected at all. Whether Taliban's victory will become a moral booster for the Islamic radicals and Islamists in the Xinjiang region remains to be seen. We do not know if the Islamic radicals in Xinjiang are in a position to pose a threat or challenge the authority of Beijing, because that's a far off question. What we know is that there are fighters from Xinjiang who are active inside Afghanistan, and perhaps the Chinese want to neutralize those people. But I'm not quite sure if the Taliban, really wants to do it immediately, or would it wait till the time that China recognizes Taliban. There is a school of thought which is suggesting that the first country of the P5 of the United Nations Security Council to recognize China to recognize Taliban will be China. I'm sorry about that. So once China recognizes Taliban as the legitimate ruler of Afghanistan, the whole game will change. But it also remains to be seen that whether the present rulers in Beijing will break the consensus that exists among the permanent members of the Security Council to go slow and to remain cautious about Taliban. Because once you have recognized the Taliban, then you have really lost that advantage of that carrot and stick thing that we have. As long as you have the carrot in your hand, you can always tempt Taliban, saying that it will be recognized if it carries out certain reforms or certain if it takes certain measures or certain steps But if you once have recognized, you can't really withdraw the recognition. So the Chinese are also in a very tricky situation. My guess is that a lot will depend on the summit meeting that will take place between US President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping, which is slated to be held later this year, that is in the next 2 to 3 months. And I think in that summit, the main issue will be discussed, and they will really come to a consensus whether to go ahead with the recognition or to remain cautious about this current bunch of rulers in Afghanistan. I think I would look at it from that point of view. I hope I dealt with all the questions that you raised.
Thank you, sir. We last question लेते हैं, sir. May I Dr. Subhan Dadar, sir?
Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. My questions very small, sir. India always against extremism forces, even military, this type forces. But the past relation with Afghanistan, and my question is the present Taliban governments how to treat the India's policy, or maybe India.
Can you please
So if you understand, sir?
Can you please repeat your question? दोबारा बताइए.
Sir, India always against the extremist forces, even Afghanistan extremist forces, even Taliban, whatever, Al Qaeda, extra. But the past relation with Afghanistan, India's past relations with Afghanistan, presents Taliban governments how to treat the Indian policy or India. How to treat the Indian policy, just like the investments, even economical trade relations, and what about the diplomatic? Yes, sir.
Yeah. Well, this is a very interesting question and also a very difficult one to deal with. But I'll try and answer you in some ways.
Thank you.
You see, India has dealt with revolutionaries, terrorists, fighters in the past. There have been such groups across the world. If you remember, when India got independence, there were lots of liberation movements and decolonization movements that were going on in Africa, in West Asia, and other such places. When Mr. Nehru held attended the Bandung conference, the group from Algeria that participated in that conference was invited by the Egyptian government of that time, and Jamal Abdel Nasser had invited the Algerian fighters, FLN, to the Bandung conference, and that created a lot of controversy. People in Europe were quite worried that the fighters of Algeria were invited to the non-aligned conference, the Conference of Non-Aligned Countries in Bandung. The FLN was the early part of that issue. Later on, we had PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. It was a very good friend of India. Yasser Arafat, the chairman, came to India, and he even attended the parliament with his pistol in by his side. And when Yasser Arafat came to Delhi, and he had his pistol on his side, a lot of questions were raised about India's commitment to non-violence and all such issues, which are ideological foundations of the Indian state. But that is something that countries and governments deal with. This is part of diplomacy. Countries do things that are to their advantage. PLO was a great supporter of India because it was also a mobilizer of support among the third world countries in favor of India. We had a Kashmir problem. So the Iranians, the PLO, and other such groups also used to help us at the international level through networking, through sharing of information and intelligence and other such factors. So what I'm trying to say is that dealing with an extremist force is not something that is rare for India. But what is really unique about the Taliban is that it is a force which is just 400 or a few hundred kilometers from the Indian borders. It has a particular orientation of exporting its brand of insurgency or violence through terroristic tactics. Now, to engage with Taliban, therefore, is mixed with, rather fraught with a lot of risk for India. That is why to deal with the Taliban, any sort of action to engage the Taliban has to take into consideration the fact that Taliban is not PLO. Taliban is not the Algerian revolutionaries who are fighting against the French. Taliban are Taliban, and they are quite unique. And they can pose a security threat, not just to India, but even to Iran and Russia, and certainly the next door country for them, Pakistan. So I would say that countries do things in diplomacy that is to their advantage. They engage these forces, these groups and governments, these groups, but to recognize these groups as legitimate government is something that India and mature countries like India should take a lot of time. But here is the question that you have raised about the stakes, the economic stakes that India has. India has more than $2 billion worth investment, which is lying idle in Afghanistan right now. Well, for a country like India, the $2 billion is not really a massive thing, but it's nevertheless an issue of prestige as a regional power. It does not really look nice if India fails to protect its investments in Afghanistan. So one way that a lot of us, at least some of us, believe that India should go ahead and engage that part of Taliban, which is describing itself as patriotic and some sort of a nationalist, Pashtun nationalist force within the Taliban. If these individuals and these people like Mullah Baradar and others can help India or safeguard India's interest to some ways, then perhaps we can achieve whatever we want on the economic front. And the main thing for India is also that Afghanistan is really the heart of Asia. It's in a place where the South Asia meets the West Asia. It's in a place where West Asia and South Asia meet the Central Asia. So the heart of Asia must not bleed. It should beat, and it should remain safe and healthy. Just like in an organic point of view, just like a healthy heart is good for our body, healthy heart is also good for Asia. I would say this, and also remind you that Taliban also understands the importance of economic diplomacy. Over the last few meetings that they have been holding with various powers, all that they have been asking is for economic support. Taliban is in a very bad situation as far as economic issues are concerned. They have no money, they have no revenue, and the Afghan people are not willing to give their tax to this sort of a group which is hell-bent on killing their opponents and is not engaging anybody in a dialogue. So Taliban understands the importance of economic diplomacy. That's also a handle on Taliban, which can be used to tame this outfit and make it behave according to, at least, to some standards in some standards of international, conduct and behavior.
So my one question is there to know. You talk about the military Taliban military victory. So if you start with the US movement since 2001, as you talked the Al-Qaeda, when the Osama bin Laden was killed by the forces, so they said that the primary task has been achieved. But with that also, they just focus on 2-3 things. I think they just focus on that the serious weapons of mass destructions and the serious threats from the Al Qaeda. Number one. The second thing is that they try to focus on the rather promoting stability. They focus promoting democracy in Afghanistan, and I personally feel they put some kind of a chaos in their Taliban regime, that local leaders were based on foreign military power to maintain the legitimacy of Afghanistan as a the promotion hub of democratic ideas. And what the US did, that the military objectives should not or the welfare of the Afghanistan people. So do you see that the goal that has been changed from short term to long term, and the military objectives were followed to gain the promoting democracy rather than promoting stability. So that affects Afghanistan. The Taliban people felt that it is an interference in their religious and their ethnical issues. Do you see that?
Well, yes. I mean, of course, the military goal was to achieve revenge for the 9/11 attacks. Number one, and also partially to defeat any challengers on the ground of Afghanistan. Politically speaking, and also the social angle that you have pointed out, the Taliban has been quite clear from the beginning that it is not going to compromise on the social issues that it considers to be fundamental to its movement. Taliban is committed to Islamic values, number one, and that too of a certain variety of Islam. It is also committed to certain vision of Afghan society where the women have a specific role to perform. Women are not expected to participate in Taliban's vision of Afghanistan, and that is a fundamental issue for Taliban in Afghanistan. That is also a great mistake on the part of the international community, who have been engaging with the Taliban with the expectation that Taliban can be convinced to modify its stance on women. The issue is that Taliban is probably willing to compromise on the economic front, probably willing to compromise on even political front, but it is unlikely to compromise on what is the social and religious angles and those factors. Also on the ethnic grounds, those ethnic groups and those leaders of certain ethnic groups like the Masood family and others of the Tajik section, or say the Uzbek and the Hazara leaders who are known to be against the Taliban, are also unlikely to find favor with the Taliban government, because they have been saying that if necessary, we are willing to share power with a new generation of these various social and ethnic groups. They are willing to share power with technocrats, with doctors, engineers who are from Tajik and Uzbek or Hazara community. But they are not willing to share power with the warlords and others who were against them in the last 20 years. Because from their point of view, please remember that they are the victors. They have won a war, and a war that they fought against the superpower. So, what we say is somebody is high. So Taliban is actually high on power because they have won a massive military victory, and this is their perspective. So to negotiate with the Taliban, the world must remember the Taliban mindset right now, that yes, they have lost. They are in a very difficult situation in Afghanistan. Yes, they are finding it very difficult to govern the country. But the fact remains that they defeated the United States in a war which lasted for 20 years. So I think, to answer your question, the main thing is they are quite clear on what they want on the social, political, and ethnic sides of their calculations. They don't really want to compromise on those fronts. They have already done the military part with the United States evacuation. And they are where they are right now, I mean, in a difficult position, but they are bringing their understanding on social, gender, religious, and cultural issues to the table whenever they are going for engaging other countries in the region and beyond.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, may I ask one question?
सर अभी सर मैं वोट साइड तरफ जाता हूँ आज के सेशन का वोट साइड करने के लिए मैं प्रोफेसर सुशील पवार से को इनवाइट करता हूँ कि वो आज के सेशन का वोट ऑफ साइड है प्रोफेसर सुशील पवार सर
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah.
Very good morning to everyone. My name is Professor Sushil Kumar Pawar from Department of Defense and Strategic Studies, BP Arts, SMS Science and TKC Commerce College, Chalisgaon, Maharashtra. Our college is affiliated to North Maharashtra University. First of all, I would like to thank the organizer for giving me this opportunity to giving vote of thanks to the special guest for this beautiful, enlightening and research-oriented, inspiring event. Today, we got the benefit of valuable thoughts and scholarly lecture by Mr. Kolol Bhattacharjee. He is a senior assistant editor for the Hindu, a well-known newspaper. Kolol Bhattacharjee studied in political theory and international affairs at the University of Delhi as well as JNU, Jawaharlal Nehru University. A journalist for the last 15 years, he has written extensively on some of the enduring conflicts in South Asia, West Asia, North Africa. He takes special interest in the political elite of South Asia and actual conduct of foreign policy in South Asian region or region. He has written 2 books titled A Politician Among the Economists. We are very aware of that. A biography of Manmohan Singh. And the second book is The Great Game in Afghanistan, which is showed by Dr. Tusharji. A biography of Manmohan Singh. And the second is The Great Game in Afghanistan, Rajiv Gandhi, General Zia, and The Understanding War. These 2 books are very crucial. It is helpful to scholar, researcher, readers, and we must take advantage from these books. Sir, in your lecture, you enlighten us to understand Talibani victory in a simple manner, in a simple language. This lecture was very instructive and reminded to us many details, many small details. Your concept of 2 wins, 2 victories can develop the scope of study in this topic among the researchers.
Thank you.
Military and diplomatic win. Once again, nice lecture, sir, for this beautiful, enlightening and research inspiring lecture. I thank you on the behalf of Professor Bhainabai Chaudhary, North Maharashtra University and Department of Defense and Strategic Studies and all of us attending. At the same time, I would like to thank Session Chairman, very well-known Dr. Shantaramji Bhatguzar sir, Principal of SNDT Women's College Shahada. The Department of Defense and Strategic Studies organize such event every year to provide a platform for us to develop in terms of knowledge and research. so that Honorable Vice Chancellor of our university, Pro Vice Chancellor, then Registrar Sir, and most importantly, the Director of the school, Dr. Anis Chikate Sir, has played an important role for organizing such event regularly. On the behalf of all of us, I would like a special thank to them. I would like to thank Department of Defense and Strategic Studies and these 1 week national seminars organizers, Dr. Tusharji Raising Sir, Dr. Subhanji Jadhav Sir, Vilajji Kumawat, and all their research students. On the behalf of all of us, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to all the faculty members and non-teaching staff of the Department of Defense and Strategic Studies and school also. Importantly, on the behalf of all of us, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to all the participant professors from the Defense and Strategic Studies and other subjects, all researcher, and whom his program is incomplete without the audience. So, thank you all of you. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Over to Dr. Tusharji Raising.
थैंक यू सुशील सर। सर आखिर में फिर से हम आपका बहुत समझा ना, थैंक यू सुशील पवार सर। और फाइनली कलोल भट्टाचार्य सर कि आपने अपना इतना कीमती समय हमारे यूनिवर्सिटी के बच्चों के लिए एक किया सर। हम आपका ये लेक्चर्स, ये आपके थॉट्स, इसको हम रिकॉर्ड करके हमारे बच्चों के लिए इसका एक टेक्स्ट में एक पेपर या बुक्स, एडिटेड बुक निकालने का आगे हमारा एक प्रयास रहेगा। और सर हमारी आपसे एक रिक्वेस्ट है कि आपका जो मार्गदर्शन है, आपका जो गाइडेंस है हमारी यूनिवर्सिटी के बच्चों के लिए आगे भी ऐसे ही रहेगा। जहाँ जहाँ हमें आपके गाइडेंस की, आपके मार्गदर्शन की हमें आवश्यकता लगेगी, हम आपसे जरूर संपर्क करेंगे। आपने अपना कीमती समय हमें दिया सर, इसलिए हम कवियत्री बाइनाबाई चौधरी, नॉर्थ महाराष्ट्र यूनिवर्सिटी जलगांव की तरफ से हमारे वाइस चांसलर सर, प्रो वाइस चांसलर सर, रजिस्ट्रार सर, डायरेक्टर सर एंड ऑल फैकल्टी मेंबर ऑफ द डिपार्टमेंट ऑफ डिफेंस एंड स्ट्रेटेजिक स्टडीज, बीओ चेयरमैन ऑफ पॉलिटिकल साइंस सर, इन सब की तरफ से सर आपका आभार व्यक्त करते हैं। और कल के सेशन के बारे में पार्टिसिपेंट जो आज हमारे साथ जुड़े हुए हैं उनको बता देते हैं कि अगला जो डे 4 है, कल डॉक्टर अनघा गुहा रॉय करके रिसर्च एक स्कॉलर है दिल्ली पॉलिसी ग्रुप से, वो कल हमें 4th डे में सेशन एक्सपर्ट है, जिनका टॉपिक है कि टॉपिक कौन सा है जो 1 मिनट है, जो हमें कल के सेशन में डीलिंग विद द तालिबान, इंडिया स्ट्रेटजी इन अफगानिस्तान, डीलिंग विद द तालिबान, इंडिया स्ट्रेटजी इन अफगानिस्तान आफ्टर यूएस विड्रॉल, इस टॉपिक के ऊपर मार्गदर्शन करने वाले हैं। तो मेरे सभी पार्टिसिपेंट्स को विनती रहेंगी कि कल का आज जैसे आपने इंथुजियास्टिकली सेशन को अटेंड किया वैसे आप कल करें। फाइनली आप सबका आभार व्यक्त करता हूँ और ये सेशन ही समाप्त हुआ ऐसा डिक्लेयर करता हूँ। थैंक्स अ लॉट सर।
थैंक यू डॉक्टर तुषार।
थैंक यू
डॉक्टर भट्टाचार्य।